Hello and welcome to this channel, Highly Sensitive Wisdom. My name is Susanna and today's topic is why we need to study the Bible. So I have brought my Bible. It is in Portuguese, a Biblia Sagrada, and in a way this is a continuation of the last video. It's called The Three Biggest Lies You Have Ever Been Told. I will drop the link to that video in the description below. And yeah, I will share some experiences I have had that have opened my spiritual eyes, my understanding, going from a more mind-based intellectual understanding, going to a more heart-based and soul-based perspective and a more holistic understanding of why this is so important. And yeah, bringing some light on what can happen if we don't take this seriously. Also, because we live in a crucial point in time in humanity's evolution, and so much is going on in the world. I will comment also on that a little bit. And yeah, we need to study the Bible to bring some light and both on what is going on now and some spiritual principles and yeah, how we can rely more on God also. And yeah, I did record a previous video about God. It's well, a few different actually, but the one I want to highlight here is deepen your relationship with God and receive your blessings. I will drop the link to that video in the description below. And yeah, this will not be some kind of moralistic, like you should do this, you should do that. Obviously, you decide for yourself. But I do believe that the arguments and the examples I will give will be convincing, I hope to some degree, or at least plant a seed in you, so that you don't have to suffer and go through so many hardships that I had to go through in France when I lived there for 7 years. And I will also put that in the light of spiritual understanding, right? And how those hardships led me straight to looking more actively for God and also being super, super motivated and committed to studying the Bible. All right, so if you like this content, please yeah, subscribe to the channel or share with people you have around you, people who can benefit from this content, so that more spiritual eyes can be opened. And give the video a like. And yeah, I really like it also when you share your aha moments, your takeaways, or what resonated with you from this content in the comment section so that we can inspire and uplift each other. And thank you in advance for your participation. All right, so if you have watched a few different videos on this channel, Highly Sensitive Wisdom, it is no surprise to you that, because yeah, I have spoken about it a lot, to extract all of the wisdom I possibly can and not let those hardships and those years of suffering go wasted. Because when it comes to consciousness, nothing is ever wasted. It really depends on what we do with the material, what we are going through, and our ability of seeing beyond our own perspective and not just focusing on, oh, I was suffering, I was going through struggles, I went through hardships. Now let's turn the page and move on. Yeah, we also need to move on, obviously, but if we can, extract the spiritual wisdom, the gold nuggets of wisdom and the principles that we're operating that at the time maybe we're not aware of those principles, then we can extract that wisdom, share it with the world, and also empower others. And hopefully prevent others from suffering or struggling as much, so we can help each other grow, learn and grow and uplift each other. That is also one of the purposes of this YouTube channel, Highly Sensitive Wisdom. So I don't want to sit on all this information and all of this wisdom and all of these, aha moments that I have had. I don't want to just sit on this information and let that wisdom go to waste. I want to share it. So yeah, to help others and also to honor God, obviously, because this is a mission that God has given me, that I need to speak up. I need to use my voice. I need to speak about these things, with courage and straightforwardness, and yeah, help others to see these things so that yeah, more people can wake up. We are living in times. And truly, more people need to wake up spiritually to see what is going on, because the world is, yeah, well, it has always been quite a harsh place, a lot of violence and greed and all kinds of hardships, and many people who have been stuck in survival mode. And wars and conflicts and blah 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 blah. Yeah, I don't have to tell everything that has been going on in this world. So many things are going downhill and have been going downhill for for millennia. So that is nothing new. What is new now is that things are accelerating in a crazy rhythm. Time is accelerating. Maybe you have noticed that, dear watcher. Time is accelerating. The progress of technology is accelerating to just absurd speed, AI, because AI is given so much power to make its own decisions, which in turn creates snowball effects so that AI, artificial intelligence, reinforces itself. And soon enough, AI will start, making decisions that will affect life and death for human beings. And yeah, obviously, AI will also take over many jobs, many employment opportunities for people, making people, redundant or superfluous. And yeah, that is nothing new. Every time it has been some kind of industrial revolution or some kind of major progress in technology, even in the past, that has meant, replacing humans with technology. So this is nothing new. As I said, what is new now is the crazy speed of accelerating all of those processes going on. And yeah, so much deception also going on in the world, both both with mainstream media, with what is called entertainment, um, social media, so many things keeping us entertained. Which, yeah, entertainment in reality, what it is distraction. We have to read. When I say entertainment, yeah, that's how mainstream people think of it. Like, oh yeah, I had a long day at work. I'll come home. I'll watch a movie or watch a series or whatever, just to distract, my mind, to just have a nice evening, and then I go back to work next day. But yeah, we need to understand that we're being distracted from something much more important, something much more essential, something much more at our core, and that, yeah, I will record another video on that, how the Matrix uses distraction also as a strategy to keep us away from God, which is our source of power, our source of life, our source of truth, our source of all knowledge. And yeah, when we are far away from God and we don't have the spiritual protection from God, things can really become difficult for us. So yeah, the Bible. That is the topic for today. Before I get carried away with other topics, because yeah, I am brainstorming, new topics for this channel, and there are many topics I want to record. And so yeah, the Bible. Why we need to study the Bible. So I will use as an example first and foremost the desert I went through in France. At the time, I was not Christian. I was not a follower of Jesus Christ. I became officially a follower of Jesus Christ last year when I got baptized. And yeah, baptism for grown-ups, because only when you're a grown-up you have enough understanding, enough discernment, enough awareness to use your free will to take to make that very important decision in your life, and that commitment to become a follower of Jesus Christ, and to learn more about Jesus Christ and follow his examples. And um, they committed with that path, and also studying is included, studying the Bible, so you learn more about Jesus Christ. But when I was in France, I didn't have the understanding I have now. I did not have the tools. I did not have a supportive community. Everything was just, yeah, everything was very harsh, there. And I even used that word, like desert. This is an emotional desert. Like, in comparison with previous experience I had, especially living in South America, that was, brutal, in contrast, because yeah, no one cares, everyone is disconnected, people are rude, people extremely passive aggressive, and everything just seems to turn around in circles, and you feel like I'm not getting anywhere, I'm just wasting my time here. So for me, that was truly a desert. And I understood when I started studying the Bible, with amazing support from the church I'm active in now since last year, with an amazing pastor, Pastor Jose. So gratidão if you are watching this, gratidão. Yeah, amazing pastor with over 30 years of experience as a pastor who knows the Bible by heart. And I could not have a better guide, to guide me through this process, to teach me and answer my many questions. Many questions. I'm a lifelong student and lifelong learner. So what God showed me through that experience is, and why God has also been, insisting quite a lot for me to start studying the Bible. God started calling me over 20 years ago when I was in Brazil as an exchange student in high school. I was I was living in a host family, a Brazilian host family that is very dedicated to God and very active in church. They went to church twice a week, and I was not a believer at the time. I was not at all interested in God or anything that had to do with God at the time. But I wanted to show, respect for the family that was hosting me. So I went to church twice a week with them, and was exposed to, to worship, to the Bible, to, music, worship music. And obviously that planted a seed in me, even though I didn't know it at the time. I received so much love and so much support and so much, it was just wonderful. I mean, I would have stayed there forever if I could, even though I was not a believer at the time. So that planted a seed in me. And throughout my life, and with experience in other countries also, there have always been people, taking me to church. So, and in other countries also, I was not a believer. And then, yeah, I would go to church with them from time to time because they were my friends and I didn't want to disappoint them, and yeah, I do enjoy singing a lot. But yeah, for me, that was quite superficial because I didn't have the faith and the commitment that I have now. And I needed to go through those hardships and that desert in France and have that experience, as I have mentioned many times in this channel, of going through a pressure cooker for my consciousness to truly become committed and truly become committed and truly understand the seriousness of all this. And because yeah, I was not taking it seriously previously. I was so focused on the external world. I was also focused on my studies. I was so focused on, learning languages. I was so focused on decoding the social codes in every new country I arrived in. Because let me remind you that I have lived abroad in 4 different countries on 2 different continents, and I have traveled a lot in my younger years. And for me at the time, that was very fulfilling. But in France, God allowed that desert to happen in my life for me to shift focus and go inwards. So God activated a massive spiritual awakening in me in back in 2018, and then the year after, 2019, I embraced, God wholeheartedly and just, welcomed God into my life and made it a priority every single day to have a relationship, a close relationship with God and learning more about God. And obviously the Bible is a good source of information for that. So as recently as yesterday, actually, God told me, very clearly in my heart, that yeah, you need to study the Bible also because that will give you references in the forms of, biblical people who have lived before you, things that have happened in the past, and principles that you may or may not be aware of now, but those will help us in our communication. God told me that will help us in our communication because then I can use those references because you will, have studied them, you will be aware of them. I can use those references to guide you and give you instructions and tell you like, oh, this is happening now. Remember that passage in the Bible, or remember that person in the Bible, or remember, what they did. And then I will not be taken by surprise, as was the case in France, everything in France and the detox after, because yeah, I have been through a very intense detox for more than 3 years now after that. I will not be taken by surprise because I will have more understanding of how the spiritual world works, the spiritual realms, how they work. And I will also have those references, so God will be able to tell me, like, oh, hey, remember Moses, or remember this and that, or remember that person, or remember that, part, or that passage. And our communication will be so much easier having those references, right? So, so yeah, this reference in the Bible about the desert. Actually, there are several references in the Bible about the desert, but the one I want to focus on in this video is when Moses led the people out of Egypt. They were held as slaves in Egypt, and suffering a lot of oppression, suffering a lot of hardships, and just living under very harsh living conditions in Egypt. So God used Moses as a leader to leading the masses, and they were millions of people. I've heard different estimations how many they were, because as far as I know, the Bible doesn't give an exact number, but somewhere around 3 million or so people. Um, so yeah, Moses led uh, these people out of Egypt to the promised land. The problem was that the people still have the mindset of slaves, even though they left Egypt physically. They still have that mindset, and they were complaining a lot. They didn't want to obey God. Didn't want to. Um, yeah, they were complaining a lot, and they were like not quite believing yet that they would actually reach the promised land. And they got stuck in their own, they got in their own way. They got stuck in their own way of thinking, and in their own, problem focused way. So what would have taken only a few weeks, if they had gone from point A to point B, like, okay, between Egypt, where they had to leave, and to the promised land, this is the distance we have to travel. And yeah, they were walking. So this is the distance we have to walk to arrive to promised land. And that should have, by all means of human logic and reason, should have taken only a few weeks. But they ended up in the desert for 40 years. 40 years. They were just turning in circles. They were turning in circles. God didn't allow them to arrive to promised land before they had changed their hearts and could wholeheartedly believe in God's promises and have faith in God, and have a heart aligned with God's heart, so they could actually access the promised land. As long as they had this slave mindset and were only complaining and being rebels against God, and worshiping other gods and inventing all kinds of stuff, that had nothing to do with God and God's promises, they could not enter. They could not access the promised land. So Moses sent 12 men, one from each tribe of Israel, the chosen people of God, to this promised land, so they would observe what's going on, and take some sample of fruits and stuff and bring to the people, and give their testimonial as witnesses what they have seen in the promised land. And then they arrived back, but only two of these men had a strong enough faith in God's promises to realize that, yeah, this will be a wonderful land to live in, and God is, spoiling us with this promised land, and this will be amazing, and yeah, we'll have to keep going and following God's direction, because God's promises are amazing. There were only two men who had that mindset and that kind of attitude. The other 10, they saw just problems and obstacles. So they saw, like, oh, this is a land with giants. They are bigger than us. They are stronger than us. They felt like insects in comparison, and they just felt, like, oh, there's no way we are going to beat those giants. They will just crush us. They will just, destroy us. It's better we don't even go there. So 10 men had that mindset, that mentality, that attitude, and only focused on the problem and the obstacles, and their own fears. So they came back to the masses. Excuse me. They came back to the masses, and that's the story they were telling. Like, oh, these giants, they are bigger than us, they are stronger than us. There's no way we are going to, conquer this land. There's no way we're going to, be victorious in this quest. We'd better, just die in the desert, or something along those lines. I'm obviously not quoting the Bible here. I'm just using my own words, but that was, the kind of mindset they had. So they spread fear. They spread a story and a narrative of fear to the people in the people who were walking towards the promised land. And because most of the people believe their narrative and their story and allow themselves to be contaminated with fear instead of having faith in the promises of God, because God had already promised them this land. And when God gives you a promise, the victory is already guaranteed. You just don't know when or how, right? God will reveal those things in God's divine perfect timing. But but yeah, of course, there can be fear, there can be doubts, there can be obstacles on the way. And no one has said that just because God gives us promise, no one says that the path to reaching, to materializing and manifesting those promises, no one said that the path will be pain-free or effortless. But yeah, when we do receive promises from God, we already have the promise that the victory will be ours. So so what we have to choose, what we will align with. So only two men aligned with God's promises and aligned with faith. Like, yeah, we don't know exactly how we will arrive there, but God promised us this land, and this land is amazing. You will have an amazing life there. Yeah, or something along those lines. I'm using my own words here, but something along those lines. Um, and those were the only two from their generation who were allowed to enter the promised land. Oh, yeah, I'm so strong skills now. Those were the only two who were allowed from there. Oh, very strong skills. Yeah, God is speaking through me. Um, those were the only two who were allowed. Ooh, wow, very strong skills. Yeah, this is important, God. I understand this message is very, very important for you to send me such strong shells. Wow. Um, yeah, those were the only two men, those who had that positive, faith-based, message and attitude aligned with God, with the heart of God. Those were the only two who were allowed to enter the promised land. All the others had to die in the desert before they could enter the promised land. And Moses also died. He didn't make it to the promised land. So those two men who had been to the promised land and seen and giving witness testimonial about what they saw, and who believed in God's promises enough to spread a message of hope. Those were the only two from their generations who made it there, and all the others were the sons and daughters, of the previous generation who were allowed to enter. And this was so. You would think, because the older generation, they had witnessed, they had seen with their own eyes so many miracles, so many miracles, so many supernatural things, so many magnificent proofs that God had already given them, that they can trust God, they can trust God's promises, they can have faith, and God is stronger and more powerful than anyone else. That God will lead them to the promised land, and they will have a good life there because God promised them that. They had seen, they had seen the sea, splitting to open a path for them to pass through when the army of the Pharaoh from Egypt was, following after them and trying to catch them to hinder them from escaping from Egypt, right? They had seen that, amazing supernatural miracle and other miracles, and still they prefer to believe in a fear-based narrative. Was the majority of those men who were sent as spies to get to get acquainted with the promised land. So yeah, that was the desert turning in circles because something in them had to change. And when I was in France, and that is the parallel I wanted to make, right? Not only speak about the Bible, but how does this apply to us? So in my younger years, I was relying very much on my intellect because I was a top student. I had, I was a straight A student in high school. My teachers called me the star of the class. The day we graduated from high school, we were like 400 students reunited, and three students were called to the front to receive public acknowledgement of our excellent study results. And I was one of those three among 400 who received public acknowledgement for my excellent results. At university, my average grade was 89 out of 100. That was not my highest grade, that was my average grade. I had 100 as a grade in more than half of all the courses I took. So I was very confident in my own capacities, in my own abilities, and was relying heavily on my own intellect. And yeah, in the world, that would seem like a good thing, right? Who wouldn't want to be a top student? But that was hindering also my relationship with God, because then I was relying so heavily on myself and not, surrendering to God and asking God for help more often, with all kinds of things. And God wants to have close relationship with us. God doesn't want us to do everything, you know, on our own. That was never God's plan or God's design for humans. We were designed to live in community with God and have a very close relationship with God throughout our lifetime, and to have faith in God, even if the circumstances around us seem very difficult, or like in some circumstances we just don't know what to do. And yeah, I have also recorded videos on that. Like everything was just chaotic, and so many signs that I was in the wrong place with the wrong people, and my subconscious producing all of these different kinds of symptoms to warn me and to, you know, to push me away from that. But yeah, I was focusing too much initially the first few years on solving those symptoms, and didn't connect the dots until later, how everything was interconnected. So the desert I went through in France, that was my own kind of being trapped in the desert before I can return to or I can arrive to the promised land. And for me, the promised land, as irony would have it, was returning to my country of origin. But seeing my country of origin with new eyes and a whole new perspective. Just like if you have read the novel by Paulo Coelho, the Brazilian famous author Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist, also about someone leaving their home country and their home region to go looking for treasures in foreign lands, only to discover that the treasures were in their backyard all along, but they needed to have all those experiences abroad in foreign lands to develop the vision and the appreciation to be able to realize that, yeah, truly the treasures were in my backyard all along. So for me, the promised land turned out to be my home country, and I didn't know it. I had to go through that desert in France first and be tried by the fire, because yeah, the fire of God can be difficult to manage, difficult to handle, but also empowering once you get out of it and understand how it all works, right? And very enlightening, very, very enlightening. So that desert in France, as challenging as it was, yeah, that was the perfect scenario for God to, yeah, try me by the fire, and also to motivate me to actually look actively for God, and to take my spirituality seriously, and to see Sweden also in a new light with new eyes, and to learn all of these different spiritual tools, like cultivating gratitude. And because I was surrounded with people who are, in nearly 100% of cases, severely passive aggressive, complaining constantly. The French themselves, they say that their national sport is complaining. They say that themselves. They don't even hide it. So they complain about everything, 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 everything. And just like the people in the desert that Moses was put as a leader to, take them through the desert and to the promised land. But yeah, he couldn't do that as long as the people he was trying to, lead through the desert, they were just complaining, 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 focusing on problems, focusing on problems, being ungrateful for all of the miracles that God had already given them, being ungrateful for all the blessings God had already given them. Yeah, obviously God had to have them turn around in circles, and that's exactly what's happening with the French. They just complain, 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 complain. They're passive aggressive, and they don't take accountabilities for what they do, and much less for what they think or they feel. They just project it onto other people, just like the masses in that desert. And I needed to see all that, and change things in myself. But once I had learned the lessons of going inwards and doing my own healing work and focusing on gratitude and so forth, then I was ready indeed to come out of the desert. And yeah, I give all of the glory for that to God. I could never have done it alone. It was so challenging. With all of those symptoms and all of that, I mean, I was a victim of domestic abuse from my ex-boyfriend in France, which also made it difficult to even believe something else was possible for me, because you get caught in those very unhealthy dynamics. And so many of his very, very negative, attitudes having them trapped in my own subconscious. And I still work actively 3 years and a half later. I still work actively, on subconscious reprogramming to get rid of all of those negative influences from him. So yeah, truly, only the glory, I mean, the grace and the mercy of God to get me out of there, because by all, reason, all human logic, I would have been stuck there forever because my subconscious was already, producing that kind of situations and that kind of scenarios on autopilot, because that is what the subconscious is designed to do. And that's why we have to be so careful also who we choose to allow into our inner circles, so that we don't get trapped in those very unhealthy, toxic, abusive dynamics. Because yeah, then we could truly be, turning around in circles in the desert for decades. And then it doesn't matter how much you focus on your gratitude and how much you focus on your inner work and how much you focus on, uh, you know, empower yourself to get yourself out of the mud, so to speak, because they will constantly drag you down. So then it doesn't matter how much you make efforts, because they will take advantage of your efforts to have them, rise up, even though they didn't do their inner work. So you're just shooting yourself in the foot by staying. But as I said, it's very complicated to leave also. I will give you a few examples. I was suffering from insomnia very repeatedly. I was suffering from panic attacks. I was suffering from severe eczema, persistent severe eczema that also stayed with me while I was back in Sweden. It stayed with me a total of 6 years. I had developed claustrophobia, so many times when I was going to work, I had to make a U-turn on the train because I had such severe panic attacks, and I just couldn't be among the crowd. There's so much negativity and so much stuff going on there. And yeah, there had been this pandemic, COVID. I had been through 3 lockdowns, and there were still rumors that could be another lockdown on less than 24 hours of notice from the government, which had been the case in all the previous 3 cases. So yeah, I was like, yeah, I want to leave, but how? Truly miracles from God, to take me out of that. And even with the claustrophobia, even the idea of sitting in an airplane for 2 hours between France and Sweden, that was quite, stressful for someone with claustrophobia. So yeah, so challenging to get away from the desert, even though I had done my inner work and I had done, whatever I could to, you know, to align more with the heart of God. So yeah, God and God repeatedly says this in the Bible, in the Old Testament. God consistently reminds the people, the chosen people, I brought you out of Egypt. I took you out of Egypt. Yeah, it was me taking you out of Egypt, and I give all the glory to God for taking me out of France. I could never have done it alone, never. So yeah, God, you can remind me that you took me out of France, from the desert. I could never have done it on my own, But because I am studying the Bible now, so seriously and committedly, and yeah, consistently. And yeah, I plan to do that for many years to come because I never want to go through again what I went through in France and be taken by surprise by so many less pleasant experiences. I prefer to be prepared, for whatever will come in the future. I want to be prepared. And here we have so many answers. And God has been trying to tell me that for over 20 years, and I just listen. And because I refuse to listen, yeah, God allowed suffering and hardships until my heart was open and receptive to this kind of wisdom. So yeah, take it seriously, dear watcher, because there will be challenging times ahead, and there are also many processes in the Bible, some of which are already materializing in the world right now. So many pastors, especially online, they say that the Bible is more, accurate than the newspapers. Yeah, the Bible that you read today is more accurate than the newspaper you will read tomorrow. And that's true, because the spiritual principles that operated thousands of years ago are still operating today. So even if the people who lived back then, they are a long time gone, they died a long time ago, the spiritual principles that govern their lives are still governing our lives. And that's also when I understood this, that just opened an entirely new dimension for me. Because as long as I had this very intellectual, mental perspective, I was like, yeah, why should I read the Bible? That happened thousands of years ago. That has nothing to do with me. And that I had a very, superficial intellectual understanding. And then for me, reading the Bible or studying the Bible, that was just like, oh, those are just stories. I'm not interested in listening to stories. And I want to live my life. I'm not interested in those stories of people who died thousands of years ago because I didn't understand back then that the spiritual principles that govern their lives are still operating today. And that, yeah, when we study the Bible, we can prepare ourselves better for what will come also, so we are not taken by surprise, and so that we don't have to do so much guesswork and also not have to suffer as much for making choices based on our current understanding or on limited information, because no one has all of the answers, no one has the big picture. God has all of the answers and God has the big picture, but God is the only one who has all of the answers and the bigger picture. As humans, all of us have a reduced, limited perspective, so all of us will be taken by surprise at some point. Sooner or later there will come a surprise in life that will take you off guard, and you'll be like, oh, hey, what's going on here? I have no idea. So yeah, it's better to prepare ourselves while we still can, in a peaceful, calm setting, and not having to do it in the middle of, like, I had to, figure out what's going on in the middle of insomnia, in the middle of panic attacks, in the middle of, severe eczema, in the middle of claustrophobia, in the middle of being in an abusive relationship, in the middle of, everything was just working against me, and for good reason. I was in the wrong place with the wrong people. That was never my place to stay. That was just a desert. That was just a place to spend a few years to learn what I had to learn and then move on. So France for me was never meant to be my place of residence or my place of, this is where I will have my roots and live my life. I was there. I believe that I was there because I wanted to be fluent in French, in the belief that that would allow me to be admitted to the program of diplomas in Stockholm, Sweden. I wanted to become a diplomat, so I believed that moving to France would help my career. I also believed that I had found the love of my life, which was completely false. So I was deceived on so many levels. But the real reason for being there was to have this spiritual awakening and all of these very deep transformational experiences that taught me very deep things and wisdom that will probably serve me for the rest of my life, and catch up, all of the spiritual, evolution I would have had I taken these seriously earlier in my life from the start when God started calling me. So yeah, I can definitely see from God's perspective that those years of struggles and hardships were completely necessary for me to have that, pressure cooker on my consciousness um, activated so that I would, catch up and align myself with God's plans for my life, not only my own plans, but God's plans for my life. So I can definitely see how that desert was completely necessary. And I can even thank God now for not only bringing me out of it, but also for, allowing those things to happen, because that was also an act of mercy from God, seen from a higher perspective and seen from the turbulent times ahead of us. I needed to catch up on my spirituality, and that was a good way of doing that. Uh, so, yeah, dear watcher, take this seriously. Study the Bible. You'll find so many answers here. So I'll start wrapping up today's video. I have more videos to record, and yeah, let's stay in touch. And as always, take care, stay hydrated, and see you soon in another video. Bye for now.